Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I am happy to have Kim Halfhill with me, and she has her own consulting firm and is no stranger to coalition work. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. Happy Friday, everybody.
Absolutely. We were just talking about this week was long and rough, so it's good to have the end in sight.
Absolutely.
So, Kim, tell us a little bit about what you do with your consulting business and your coalition work.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I have my own consulting business. I work with mission-driven organizations, primarily nonprofits, but also some government agencies from time to time, as well as for-profits that kind of have a strong missional emphasis, if you will. And I do a lot of different things with my clients. Sometimes it looks like project management. Some of my favorite things to do are strategic planning with boards and nonprofit organizations. And then I always really enjoy the chance to help organizations think about their volunteer programs and how they keep volunteers engaged and doing the good work that we need our volunteers to do for our organizations to be healthy. So on the volunteer side, for me, I am involved with my local coalition here in Excelsior Springs Safe, which is one of the federally funded coalitions doing some great work here in our community. And so I feel really fortunate for their presence in our community, and I'm glad that I get to work with them.
Yes, they do great work. And we're familiar with them as well. So I want to take a moment to talk about volunteer engagement, what we were talking about, but I kind of want to break it down into two different pieces, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
First, let's talk about volunteer engagement. And then after we do that, let's talk about volunteer engagement in COVID.
Yeah, because everything looks different in 2020, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about volunteer engagement. How do folks keep their volunteers engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's a great question, and it's one that I think nonprofits have been struggling with since the beginning of nonprofits. So one of the important things to really keep in mind when we are designing strategies and programs for keeping our volunteers engaged is that volunteers really need four main things to be satisfied and engaged and fulfilled in their work. So one, they need their organization to have and to articulate a really clear vision for them, and to do that frequently, right? Because we know that vision leaks, and so we have to keep reminding ourselves and our organization and saying that over and over and over. One of the other things that's really important to know is that volunteers want really clear expectations. And so sometimes I think in our organizations, we're really afraid of telling our volunteers what it is that we need from them exactly, because we don't want to scare them away, right? Like if we tell them too much, if we tell them this is really going to take 3 hours, like maybe they're out, maybe they don't want any part of it. And actually what all of the research about volunteer engagement tells us is that the opposite of that is true, that volunteers are much more willing to commit when they know exactly what's going to be asked of them. So nonprofits, coalitions, don't be afraid. Tell your volunteers what you really need from them. Volunteers also really want tasks that fit with their strengths and their personalities. So for example, I love new projects. I love dreaming about new projects and new ideas. And so I have been fortunate to be a part of organizations who identified and knew that about me. And if there was a new project, they brought it my way and let me, play with it. And then we would hand it off to somebody else to do that maintaining work. And I would get to, so find out what's fulfilling for your volunteers and try and help them make those connections. And then the other part of that, and this circles back to vision again, is that volunteers want really, really meaningful jobs. And so if I am the person who comes in and files the paperwork for your office, right, we're doing less of that in this digital world now. But I need to know how that connects back to the mission, right? So in our organizations, jobs like that are just as important as any other job, but we have to help people understand how that connects to the mission no matter what. So whenever we're designing those volunteer engagement strategies, it's really important that we keep those four things in mind. And if we can do that and we can do those four things well, our volunteers are going to be satisfied and they're going to hang around and stay engaged with us.
And I think a lot of people think that volunteers are in it just for the recognition, and that they have to recognize their volunteers all the time. But recognition can look different for different folks. So what does that look like for some of the stuff that you've done with volunteers?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think so much of this goes back to like knowing your volunteers. And so for some volunteers, it is that like, I want my name in the newsletter, or, I want to be able to put this on a resume or whatever. And we need those folks too in our organizations. Like, so let's make space for them, and let's be glad about that. And let's honor their commitment to our organizations, in those ways. But for a lot of people, they want those more subtle things. They just want to know that they're appreciated. One of the things that I think is great to do, either in COVID times or non-COVID times, is to pick up the phone. Usually when we pick up the phone and call a volunteer, it's because we need something, right? And so to pick up the phone and call a volunteer and say, hey, I just want you to know that I was thinking about your commitment to our organization today, and I want you to know that I so appreciate that. It's 30 seconds of your day, right? So if we all called one volunteer every day, right? I'll never forget, there was a volunteer organization I was involved with back in Florida. And so, I saw the number come up in my office in my caller ID, and I thought, oh, I wonder what they want. I wonder what they want now. And they were just calling volunteers that day to say, hey, we appreciate you. And that, like, it made my day. And so just a little thing like that, I think is really important. So again, know your volunteers. And a great way to do that is just to do kind of an informal, you could do it a lot of different ways, but like an informal interview with them when they come in, and ask some of those, things. Why did they volunteer? Find out what their motivation is, and keep all of that for reference so that we can honor our volunteers in a way that's meaningful for them.
That's great. And that's great. A great tip to think about in the holiday season as well. You can
Yes,
you can wrap that up all in one.
absolutely.
Is there an average lifespan of a volunteer? Like, is there research that shows that folks will volunteer like 5 years, 2 years?
It really just depends. And a lot of it has to do with the organization, right? A lot of it's going to have to do with kind of the life stage of the volunteer. But I think it's safe to say that in all of our organizations, for all of our volunteers, that there is kind of a lifespan to that, right? And so kind of knowing that. And one of the things that I think is important to do with our volunteers, and again, this is right, we're scared to do this because we're afraid we don't want to know the answer, but is to check in with our volunteers, make it a part of an annual process, and say, is this still a good fit for you? And you may find out a lot of things. You may find out that they feel like they're going to have less time in the next year, so they need to look at a different role. Or you may find they want to up their commitment to your organization. But again, doing that, you kind of create that dialogue with your volunteers. And wouldn't we rather know that a volunteer is going to need to step back than them just stop showing up one day? So I think we have to have those conversations too.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk COVID.
Let's.
Engaging volunteers when we're not meeting face to face as much. How has this changed the landscape of volunteer engagement?
Man, it looks different, and doesn't everything look different now? I was talking with a team of volunteers that I work with the other day, and we were just talking about, is anything going to be like, how is the landscape of everything going to shift after we return to like normal? Because I really think, and I think most of us agree, that normal won't look exactly like it did 9 months ago. So in terms of volunteer engagement, I think, again, it's really important to keep those four key things, in front of us: clear vision, clearly defined expectations, tasks that fit, and again, meaningful jobs. And I think, again, the way that we have to approach that in COVID is really, really different. So for example, some of your volunteers, just because of the nature of what they may do with your organization, they may have not actually set foot in your building or been engaged right in the types of tasks they normally do for your organization in 8 or 9 months now. And that's a long window. And so the first thing I would say is that if you are not still in regular if you haven't been in regular contact with your volunteers, like, now's the time to start. So you mentioned it, holiday season is a perfect time for a phone call. It is the perfect time for a phone call. One of the things that I think is great, again, especially this time of year, and with COVID, right, and we're all doing so many things digitally, is to think about a video that you can share out to your volunteers in a newsletter, you can share on Facebook. And again, part of it is that recognition, like, hey, volunteers, we see you and we appreciate you. But more than that, it's driving it back to that mission and making sure that they know that even though they haven't set foot in your organization in several months now, that their role with your organization is just as important as it ever was. So I think about that. One other thing is that, I think COVID has looked different for everybody. So, so some of us who have children who are either partially or fully doing virtual school, we feel like our hair is on fire a lot of days, like trying to work from home and balancing it and sharing our office with a dog and, a 10-year-old or whatever. But there are other folks in our circles and our organizations who may still be almost completely, in self-isolation, who are feeling very disconnected from the world. And those people have more time on their hands. So are there things that we can be engaging those people with to be doing from home where it's safe, but that still keeps them engaged with our organizations? So I think about, creating volunteer expectations. Who knows that better than your volunteers? So this is a great time to be doing some things like that you wouldn't normally have folks who could concentrate on that. But surely there are people in our organizations that we can trust with that kind of work. So think outside the box and just stay in touch with your volunteers. Even though all of us have so many things going on, they want to hear from you.
That's great. Great advice. And thank you so much for giving us all these tips and these know-hows for volunteer engagement. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and happy holidays.
Same to you. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.